Good afternoon, everybody. How are y'all? Outstanding. I was just telling Richard in the front there that never did I ever think when I enlisted in the Army as an infantryman 20 years ago that I'd get to be here on stage at RSA. So this is really special for a lot of different reasons. I work at a company called Dragos. You may have heard of our CEO, Rob Lee. He's kind of well known in the industry. And I've been privileged and blessed to support our public sector practice as we've grown over the past couple of years. But I am also an Army guy. I'm a West Virginia Army National Guardsman in a unit called the Critical Infrastructure Protection Battalion. So I get to touch and see critical infrastructure in two different, unique lenses. And that's where part of the genesis for this talk comes from that I'll hit in just a second. Before we begin, mandatory disclosure statement. And as always, there in the red, nothing that I'm going to talk about reflects the views of the United States government, Department of Defense, or any federal agencies. Everybody good with that? Thumbs up, outstanding. So this is a question that at the end of the presentation, you guys should be able to answer fairly well, along with some things that we can do. Are we ready and able to respond at scale to a critical infrastructure cyber incident or event? So where did this talk come from? 2016, I was an Army guy down in San Antonio, Texas, and the lights went out in Ukraine. And I took a step back and I said, whoa, that's not good. As I was sitting in a unit that did communications and signals, I have to have power to do what I do. That's really interesting. And about the same time, I was starting to get into the cyber community. And so I decided that that's the space I wanted to work in. That's the space I wanted to be when I grew up, right? So fast forward, the stars aligned, everything worked out. I managed to find myself in Dragos at a really amazing time as the company was growing. And I started participating in things like tabletop exercises. I got to do one that was focused on the transportation industry. And I started to hear some common themes. Themes like, if something happens, we're going to call these people. If something happens, we're going to need these resources. And as we kind of discussed through these exercises, I started to understand that maybe not all of the framework to enable these things is fully in place. Fast forward even a little bit further. I'm sitting in a room up in Connecticut at a National Guard cyber exercise called Cyber Yankee. We'll talk about it a little bit more later. There's utility participation in that exercise. And as I looked around the room at the 6 or 7 utilities that were there, all of them were Dragos incident response customers. And my first thought is that, wow, that's really amazing that Dragos as an organization protects such critical utilities and critical infrastructures in this region, the northeastern region of the United States. But then it made me kind of think of some of the questions that came up during the tabletops of, well, what if we have to do this at a larger scale, right? How many utilities, locations, assets can Dragos and the very small community of practitioners support, including across the U.S. government? And when it came time to submit talks for RSA, that's really what I wanted to kind of hit on, is level set. The truth that I came out with, and I'd ask that you guys carry this home and really think about how we can move the needle, is that we're probably not as ready or as resilient as we think we are. Now, a lot of this talk is going to sound like doom and gloom, okay? It's not an easy discussion to have, but when you walk away here, you should come out with, I think, a little bit of hope, because we can move the needle. But we have to do some things fundamentally different than our current approaches, or we're not going to succeed. Period, full stop. We cannot do what we are doing right now and think that in the next conflict, we will be successful as a country protecting our citizens. So I like things to be a little bit interactive. So I'd like a show of hands. How many people use electricity every day in the room? All right, I see everybody, okay? How many people use water every day? All right? How many people like to eat? This guy, right? Definitely. So by that, we should all know that no matter where we're from, be it the United States, China, Europe, Asia, Africa, that we're all in the same boat together. And we should all be rowing in the same direction. And that direction is to make sure that ourselves, our kids, their kids, have reliable power, water, and food at the end of the day, and all the other things necessary for human life. Can we all, agree that that is where we want to be? I'm sure you've heard Rob say those same things, and it is true. As we're talking about this, I just want everybody to also remember that we tend, as people, to want to say that we can do things, right? But when we're talking about something as important as making sure that a hospital has power and water and the things it needs to operate, that we really need to be realistic and accurate and a little bit humble when we are telling people what we can and can't do. Why is that important? Because resources are tied to the statements that we make. So if we say that we can do this, we may not get as much money to ensure that we actually can do this. So that takes us here. Reality in 2023. How many folks attended Rob's talk on Monday in the room? All right, a couple of hands. Awesome. 2023 is different from previous years because of what happened last year. Last year, the entire threat landscape in operational technology and control system cybersecurity changed. And it changed in a way that Rob actually predicted 5 years ago when he testified to the Senate for the first time. A set of capabilities was found that Dragos calls Pipe Dream. What is Pipe Dream? Pipe Dream is the first general purpose capability set to target operational technology components in a way that both denies, degrades, and destroys equipment within environments. It was built by a threat activity group that Dragos calls Chernovite. And what we do know about Chernovite is that they actively targeted a pretty significant number of organizations within the United States. So Pipe Dream, we have a capability, we have intent, and we've already seen other threat actors show ability to follow through with attacks that impact critical infrastructure. Why is Pipe Dream unique, though? Pipe Dream's unique because it targets 3 protocols that you find in almost every single industrial environment: Modbus TCP, OPC UA, and Codesys. Hundreds upon thousands of devices from almost every manufacturer who builds industrial components. And now we have a capability framework that is not tailored to a specific location, that does not rely upon a set configuration or state, but that instead can affect anything in almost any industry vertical. That is game-changing. That has not happened before. And when we flash back to attacks like the NotPetya incident, right, and we think about what things actually look like at scale across multiple types of organizations, the severity and the seriousness of that cannot be understated. So when we think about what that could look like, I want to lead off with this. This is a map that was built by a project funded and sponsored by Webster University. And it's a map of all the electric generation utilities in the United States. Why did I pick that sector or subsector? Because there was a map available and it looks really nice. But also because it shows a bit of a scale across the United States. So when we look at the amount of natural gas power generation facilities, that's what's represented by the orange dots there. We can add in our wind power generation sites, and then the black are our coal power generation sites. So flashback to Cyber Yankee, right? We had 6 utilities, all Dragos customers. That's a lot more than 6, yes? That's a lot more than 20. In total, in one subsector within critical infrastructure in the United States, we have 13,000, I think the number's like 368 electric power generation utility stations of various types across our country. So when we think about how we have to think about ourselves as a nation, that's just one subsector of a larger ecosystem. We have 10, actually more than 10 other verticals that have just as much, if not more, presence across the United States. That's a lot. So when you hear folks like General Hartman, Morgan from the NSA, and others talk about the importance of scalability, this is what we mean when we say scalability. So as I've traveled and as I've experienced and hung out with folks in the community, I've heard a couple of assumptions repeated time and time again. And we're going to talk about each of these a little bit in depth. But we have these assumptions because they help us sleep a little bit better at night, not because they're maybe truthful or accurate. And so let's talk about these in construct with that map and that amount of scale. So first, can we detect an attack? Why is this important? It's important because that tells us what to do. It tells us who we need to have in our foxhole alongside of us to get services restored. But as a nation, it also tells us how we should respond at the strategic level. Who should we tell Cybercom to go have some interaction with? How should we think about things across other utilities? If you're in the cybersecurity community, which I would assume that many are in the room, you're familiar with the NIST cybersecurity framework. The CSF has several key areas: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. In the Senate testimony earlier this year, Rob gave out the factotum of 95% of regulatory policy and just general investment is focused towards protection. And when I heard that in the room, I clicked back to a webinar that the United States Air Force Research Lab did a year or two back. Their senior cyber research scientist came out and said that every single protective measure we've ever come up with and will ever come up with has already been defeated by an adversary. 95% of our investments are towards things that an adversary has already shown that they can defeat, be it by technical means or by people. So another question was asked further on in the testimony, and Mr. Kumar from Department of Energy, he heads the CSER office there, was asked, hey, if somebody attacks our infrastructure, can we detect it? And the answer was no. So not only can't we protect against things fully, but we can't detect if we're under attack. So I think we've proven the assumption that we can detect an attack reliably and consistently to be false. Let's go on. Let's wave a magic wand. We have detected an attack successfully. Thumbs up. Once we detect an attack, are there enough resources? So this was taken from LinkedIn, right? So take the data for what it is, but it's fairly representative, at least, of the industry. GIAC is a certification body. There are 220,000 certification holders. Of those, 923 hold the ICS Incident Response Certification. Of those 923, 94 actually practice that in that field full time. And of those 94, 11 are in a leadership position: manager, director, team lead. That is a lot less than 13,368, right? So we probably don't have enough workforce for this. But let's wave a magic wand. We do. We've detected attack. We have people. Now we have a plan to execute. If you're a utility, you may have seen this. This is from the American Public Power Association Cyber Incident Response Playbook. It's pretty. I like it. The first thing we're going to do is, if we're lucky, we're going to contact our in-house incident responders. If we don't have them, or even if we do, we may contact a managed service provider. And if they're not able to really help us, we may call our neighboring utilities or cyber mutual assistant utilities. But if we're talking about a large-scale attack, they may be under threat too. So we're going to call DHS, CISA, the FBI, other folks in the government. And if you'll see at the bottom, the National Guard's actually highlighted in here as part of the plan. The National Guard has no formal tasking to provide operational technology, critical infrastructure, cyber incident response services. Industry has tasked an organization that doesn't have the people or the focus and training. So I'd argue that the plan maybe isn't fully fleshed out. But again, we're going to wave a magic wand. The plan works. So we're boots on the ground. Do we have the right information? If you're familiar with the Purdue model, we go from the top to the bottom, enterprise, all the way down to physics. And when we're doing response, we need data, and the data needs to be useful. And what you'll see is as we go down the chart, the amount of available data becomes less, but the utility and utilization of the data increases significantly. So if I'm a responder, and in the context of Pipedream, one of the components is called Evil Scholar. It really operates at those lower levels of the Purdue model, where we don't have really robust detection. We don't have a lot of available data. And so you sometimes are hamstrung by what is actually out there. So we have a data problem. All right. Wave a magic wand again. We have the data, we have the people, we've executed the plan, and we've detected an attack. We need to get that out to everybody else, to all those other utilities. So one of the successes that is happening right now is that intelligence sharing was required in a 100-day plan from the White House. What does the reality look like? Is that only a small number of utilities are actively participating, like all in those requirements. There's a lot more that are kind of like toe in, playing the hokey pokey, right foot in, left foot out. But only a small number are really in it to win it right now. A success, we have collaborative environments and collaborative efforts. Reality is when you start looking at what's being shared, a lot of it is just rehashed news articles. We have amazing leaders who are talking about the importance of public-private partnership in intelligence sharing. But the reality is that despite their availability, there's been minimal to no participation in efforts that can share information at machine speed, which is what we need to get scalable if we really have a more than a single utility incident or impact. So it really gets down to the fact that assumptions are bad. The reality is also not as good as we would like. So what do we do, right? Anybody in the military in here or former military? Maybe familiar with the phrase, take a knee, right? Let's all gather in, let's regroup and think through this. So what is going good? Workforce. We got some really good efforts right now to solve the people problem. One of which, the Operational Technology Education Consortium, I'm announcing today here that it exists. What's OTEC? OTEC is focused on building a set of curriculum that could be included in the National Center of Academic Excellence program that's administered by the NSA, because we need this capability and these people inside our workforce in the Department of Defense and the federal government. If you're familiar with what's going on at INL, you may also be familiar with the ICS COP. Why are they different? ICS COP is focused very holistically. I'm focused, the OTEC's focused on the federal government, the intelligence community, and the Department of Defense. We also have some awesome things going on at the state military departments. that are really promising. Efforts to engage and identify criticality, things like that. Really going well there. We could do more though. Where else is going good? Community visibility programs. There are 2 that are funded by Department of Energy, 1 supported by American Public Power Association, 1 supported by the National Rural Electrical Co-op Association, NRECA, where DOE is providing money and the utilities are telling their organizations what they need, and the utilities are using the grant money to pay those bills. That's a great example of the government has a desired outcome and is not getting in the way of industry in execution. There's also community-led efforts that are bringing folks together. Dragos OT Cert, 0 cost, $0, don't have to be a Dragos customer. There's also ICS for ICS, which leverages the incident command system and is a voluntary group of professionals that understand that we need leaders who can lead a response effort in an emergency using the system the government already has in play. So what should we do? What should we be doing more of? If we're the government, we need to clearly define who's going to do what so that folks like APPA and others can accurately build that information into their plans. We also need to make sure that we unify messaging so that we don't have overlapping and conflicting requirements across different bodies. If we're the DoD and the IC, we actually need to participate in those machine speed community intelligence sharing platforms. Not just say that we're going to, actually do, please. We should also encourage National Guard Bureau to formalize regional critical exercises across all CISA regions. Why is that important? We have a requirement to deliver a national exercise strategy. It already exists. The Guard is already doing this for us. All we have to do is just tie it all together, and we've answered a congressional requirement. It's not too hard, in my opinion. And then if you're an asset owner, you need to kind of reassess your incident response, your detection, and your data collection capabilities against 2 things: pipe dream, ransomware. You do those, you cover almost all the MITRE ATT&CK for ICS TTPs, and you'll know fairly accurately if you're good or if you need to make improvements. What do we do next? The government should focus on making changes through outcomes, not directives, and they should scale up those community defense efforts that I mentioned and do more for other sectors. The DoD should develop a reserve component TDA under US NORTHCOM so that we have a fight-to-night response capability. Why underneath NORTHCOM? Because NORTHCOM are the guys and gals and folks who can pull the trigger on military support to domestic infrastructure. We should also adopt what the OTEC is going to do for us, build that curriculum, formally adopt it into the CAE program so that we can leverage our cybersecurity scholarship dollars to bring workforce into the federal government. For our asset owners, we should then conduct tabletop exercises with not just ourselves, but other adjacent and supporting stakeholders. And we should also start addressing gaps that were identified when we went through our data collection analysis phase. What should we not do? We should not regulate without talking to the regulated. We don't need another TSA pipeline policy version 1. We need what was successful with the electric sector in version 2 of TSA's policy. We should not overinflate our capabilities to utilities or to Congress. We need to be accurate, humble, realistic. In the DoD, we shouldn't let our cognitive bias, that feeling of we got this, kind of get the better of us. We should constantly question ourselves. We should also stop assessing and start addressing and acting on assessments that have been conducted for years and years and years. It's hard. We just have to do it. And for our asset owners, don't stop being awesome, please. You guys are what keeps the lights on, the water running. Y'all are what makes our world go round. You should also never feel that you are alone in the fight. this community, right, we all raised our hands when we said that we all cared about electricity, power, water, food, right? So every single person in this room is in the trench line with our utility partners, looking left, looking right. We're all in the same boat. We're all rowing in the same direction together. I included a couple different resources. I'm not going to dive into these. However, I will point out that the Cyber Capability Maturity Model that DOE produced is an amazing resource and really good if you're trying to do a self-assessment of your organization. And before we close, got to switch over to question and answers, I'll say that, again, you're not alone. We have tools, we have capabilities, we have people. All of those are represented by that sword right there in the middle. And leverage those. Don't be afraid to reach out for help, to vocalize and be aggressive in saying what you need. So with that, I'd like to transition over. I think we have a couple minutes left for questions and answers. If anybody would like to take advantage, we have microphones here in the aisles. Nothing seen, nothing heard. Awesome. I'm happy to stick around afterwards, answer any questions that you may have. This is really important, right? It's important that we get it right. It's important that we actually, when we talk about partnering, we actually make that useful to people. And that we just start getting after the problem. Because right now what we're doing is not sufficient to be able to take care of our citizens and each other when that balloon goes up in the next conflict or even in the low intensity shenanigans that we have going on right now across the world. So thank you guys for y'all's time. Again, any questions, comments? Awesome. We'll talk to you guys soon, and thanks for your time. Appreciate it.